So somewhere there is a locked vault, and inside the vault is everything you ever wanted. All the love, joy, passion, energy, riches of the world. So you spend your whole life trying to open the vault, struggling and striving, doing yoga, meditating, praying, fasting, binging, restricting, accepting, rejecting, going to workshops, retreats, therapists, gurus, friends, taking pills and potions, changing your clothes, taking hot baths and cold showers, everything to open the vault. And you think, if I just do this or that enough, suddenly the lock will click and the vault will miraculously swing open. In the meantime, you rise and fall, rise and fall, rise and fall again in the vicissitudes of life and suffer. So what's inside the vault? And how do we unlock it? See, I've spent years trying to unlock the vault, trying everything from meditation to yoga to Hinduism to Buddhism to Kabbalah to therapy to bibliotherapy to workshops to the seminars to the retreats to going to India to going to Japan to neurofeedback to raw food veganism to paleo on down. And here's a secret I've learned through experience. Life doesn't start working for you until you do. Life doesn't start working for you until you do. Flourishing is the result of emotional muscle, not circumstance. Emotions are what we do, not what we experience. You see, I don't believe in circumstance. People who get what they want in this world are the people who get up and look for the circumstances they want, and if they can't find them, make them. So what about this vault? We'll think about that a little bit later. For now, we're going to talk about integral fitness. Integral fitness comes from my 26 years of experience studying with the best teachers in the world and reading the most important books ever published, and a lifetime of contemplation and learning. You don't need to take that much time, and you don't need to make as many mistakes as I have to get the same breadth and depth of knowledge. Because today I'm going to condense everything I've ever learned into 10 minutes of supercharged wisdom. There's something here for everyone, no matter how old you are, how much you've experienced, or how much you've studied. My goal is to wake you up so you can grow up positively in this world and help others. That's what I want. That's what I want, to live in a happier world. Happier because we're empowered with the tools to be integrally fit and to help others become integrally fit. So what does it mean to be integrally fit? I'm glad you asked. We all know how important it is to be physically fit. And whether or not we exercise, we know how to become physically fit. We know what it takes. But what about becoming emotionally fit or mentally fit or spiritually fit? As a culture, we don't talk about these things, but intuitively, we know what it means to be emotionally fit and emotionally out of shape. In fact, you may be dealing with someone in your life like that now, huh? Integral fitness has integrated the best tools, processes, and teachers into a complete mental, spiritual, and emotional fitness system. This isn't self-help or personal development for broken people with problems that need to be fixed. You don't need to be fixed. If you're watching this right now, there's something inside of you that's curious about what's possible. There's a part of you that wants more, that knows as high as you've gone, there's another level. That part of you demands more joy, more love, more life, more money, more passion, more dancing, more delicious tastes and experiences in life. We know that if we want stronger abs, we can do sit-ups. And if you want to manage your finances, for example, more intelligently, we can read a book or take a class. We know that getting what we want requires action. We may not always take that action, right? Like, you know what to do, but you don't do it. But as a mentor of mine says, there are over 2.6 million books on Amazon on pretty much every subject imaginable, which can be shipped in your hands today. If you're lost today, you're trying way too hard to be lost. The answers are there. And we've made it really easy for you, so you don't have to spend as many years as we did looking for them. I believe becoming integrally fit is a new way to raise the standard for maximizing my potential in life. And it's the only way I found to get what I want from life and sustain it. And sustain it, that's the key word. My journey with this work started about 5 years ago. I've been through every personal development program, therapy, NLP, bibliotherapy, meditation courses, yoga training, etc. I've mentioned that. And then I stumbled upon integral fitness, and I found that instead of just thinking and praying to be stronger in different areas of my life, I could literally step into a gym to exercise my mind, spirit, and emotions. And just like going to a gym for physical exercises, I kept showing up, and I kept getting stronger in the areas of my life that mattered most. This work is based on 8 pillars. Emotional fitness. This is exercising and experiencing more positive states like joy, love, inspiration, and creativity. You can see I'm primed. As soon as I say those words, I'm just laughing and filled with that exuberant spirit and stretching out those heavy states like fear, sadness, doubt, shame, and uncertainty. It's about cognitive development, making sure that we have the right views on life, the right paradigm. NASA couldn't put a man on the moon operating from the conditions of Aristotelian physics. This is about upgrading our operating system. Physical vitality. This is taking care of our health so that we have the maximum amount of energy to enjoy our lives. Community empowerment and communication mastery. Who I hang out with is who I become. And the meaning of my communication is the response I get. In my own life, community and family is everything. But if I'm with the right people, but I don't know how to fully express myself and be in relationship with them, then guess what? Our bond is doomed. Next is business, leadership, and achievement. It's all well and good to be an enlightened yogi on a hill. I kind of look like that, huh? But everything we have today, a camera this is filled on, the computer you're watching it on, the clothes you're wearing, to the house you're living in, was built by an achiever. We all have that part in us. We all have that part in us. The part that wants more in life. It's not enough today to talk about our dreams. We want to be able to turn our dreams into reality. Spiritual mastery. This is either the easiest pillar, or it's the hardest pillar to understand. But think about it like this. The spectrum of visible light, literally everything we can see with our eyes, is about this big on the entire electromagnetic spectrum. It's not hoodoo voodoo, it's a fact. There's more to life than meets the eyes. Finally, social contribution. What sort of legacy are you leaving on this earth? Is your being a blessing to others, or are you leaving behind an unconscious wake of suffering? These questions are important. There are processes for strengthening each of these pillars, which are unlike anything I have experienced elsewhere. And I've done a lot of stuff. And if you want to experience that, I suggest you come to one of our transformation circles or get an integral coach. But before that, I really want you to understand these pillars and why it's important to be integrally fit, not just physically fit, and why being integrally fit is a game changer. So think about this. Some people are really, really physically fit, but they're emotionally weak with negative relationships. Others are masters, absolute masters when it comes to business, but their physical vitality is in decline. Some know what to do, but can't act on it. Becoming integrally fit means becoming fit in all 8 pillars of life. That's the goal. It's simple, and it's not easy. So let's dive one step deeper. So let's start with probably my favorite pillar, emotional fitness. So who remembers the Aesop fable about the shepherd and the lion? If you don't, I'll remind you. There was once a ferocious, angry killer lion. He roared and roamed throughout the village, terrifying the villagers. And one day, an unsuspecting shepherd was grazing around his flock and headed towards the mountain lion's den. Taking a few steps towards a cave, he heard a deep rumbling. His heart froze. He had awakened the lion, who feasted his eyes upon this tasty treat of a shepherd. The lion runs up to the shepherd, rears its hind legs up, and roars, "Arr! Arr!" ready to devour the shepherd whole. Suddenly, the shepherd noticed a giant thorn stuck in the paw of the lion. Feeling his fear subside, and without hesitating, he reaches towards the lion's paw and plucks out the thorn. And the lion pulls back on his hind legs and roars from joy, jumping around like a happy puppy and licking the shepherd's face. What's so powerful about this story is that it illustrates a basic confusion we all have about ourselves and others. We learn that the lion was not mean and angry. It just had a thorn in its paw. And the shepherd's fear subsides when he realizes this and how angry he would be if he had a thorn stuck in his paw too. See, I've met a lot of people in my life, and for all the people who have done bad things, I met very few bad people. With that said, I have met a lot of people with thorns in their paws. This isn't just a little story about a shepherd and a thorn in the lion's paw. It's an outlook on life. How many of you recognize how you've had a thorn in your side that caused you to do some pretty foolish things that you're not proud of? I know I have. I didn't know it then, but most of the time, what I was doing was pretty much to get that rotten thorn out. How many of you can remember times when you realized others were acting from a thorn stuck in their paw, and by just removing that thorn, their whole lives would or could have changed? How many of you can recognize some thorns that you have in your paws? If you could just pluck them out, a whole flood of success, joy, peace, and purpose would come gushing into you. Our wounds, get this, our wounds will recreate themselves in the present for the purpose of healing them. If you don't heal wounds or find the thorns and pull them out, you'll suffer them repeatedly in your life, maybe for the rest of your life. They usually don't just dissolve. It will look like bad luck or other people's faults or circumstance, but unless you deal with the root cause, you'll keep experiencing the same results. And trust me, I know it's not easy to look at this. When I was 10 years old in Indian Guides, we took a yearly retreat with our dads to Catalina Island. I'll never forget, one day one of the older kids was climbing off trail and fell into a cactus bush. For those of you who don't know, don't live here in California, cacti have the long, obvious thorns, the really big ones, and then there are the worse, insidious thorns that are almost microscopic and lodge in your skin. Sometimes you can't even see them, and most of the time you can't just pull them out with your fingers. It's not that easy. After all the thorns had been removed, the nurse looked at Alex and said, "Now rub your hands together. Rub your hands together." And Alex's face twisted as if to say, "Are you freaking kidding me, buddy? Kiss my butt. Rub your hands together. Rub your hands together." Reluctantly, Alex put his palms together and almost immediately cried out in pain. "Where is it?" the nurse asked. Alex pointed out a thorn. "Rub your hands together," the nurse asked again. Alex nearly leapt out of his chair and hit him. "Rub your palms together." Touching his palms together, Alex nearly shrieked again, feeling another thorn. Thrusting his palm out to the nurse this time, saying, "Here it is, here it is." The third and fourth time, the nurse didn't even have to ask Alex to rub his palms together. He was eager to get all the thorns out. Finally, through messy tears, he rubbed his hands together one final time and leapt up in a gigantic burst of joy. The joy of no more thorns, no more pain, no more suffering. All done, all done, all done. I remember the nurse saying that. All done, that's it. That's all it was. And Alex ran off with us to play catch before dinner. See, thorns are painful when they're in, and it can be painful taking them out, but once they're gone, that's it. There are lots of tools we use to remove the thorns, but the main thing to understand is this. The challenge for us all, the biggest one, will be having the courage, like Alex did, to keep rubbing our palms together, especially when it hurts, because it hurts. and no one can do that for you. And no one's forcing you to take out all the thorns in your life, but suffering doesn't end until all the thorns are out. And I started this whole thing with the emotional pillar because, let's face it, quality of life begins with what you feel on a day-to-day basis. There's a poem I love called Richard Cory by E.A. Robinson about a man rich, yes, richer than a king, and admirably schooled in every grace, who everyone wanted to be like, kind of like a celebrity, a Robin Williams, a Heath Ledger, an Elvis, who shockingly goes home one night and puts a bullet through his head. To make it a little bit more real, there was a billionaire who committed suicide for not having enough money. A billionaire not having enough money. He was heir to the Volkswagen estate, and he had about $10 billion and invested $9 billion in options for an acquisition of Porsche, and then boom, Porsche ends up acquiring Volkswagen. And he was left with a measly $1 billion and killed himself. Of course, he was under a lot of pressure, but this was at the height of the financial crisis. Had he waited 7 more years, he probably would have made back all the money. All the money. Now, was it really worth committing suicide over? I'm not here to judge. I'm not here to judge him or you or anybody. And I'm the last person who would say what's right and what's wrong. But I think this is a powerful story we can all learn from. You see, it's not what we get in life, but what we feel about it that makes a difference. How many of you have seen someone far worse off than you are, shining with absolute exuberant joy, and someone far better off than you are, burdened by gloom? People do crazy things to feel good, most of which don't actually work, at least not to help them feel good in a sustainable way. But let's not try to reinvent the wheel here. There are rules. There's literally a science of creating and changing state, which requires no special beliefs, no vows to a guru, no walking on your knees through hundreds of miles through the desert, and no $10,000 course fees. It's simple, and once you get it, life will never be the same. Ultimately, three things create our emotional state: our focus, our physiology, and the language we use. We're not going to get into it too much here, but try and experiment. Close your eyes, you can try it right now, and focus on all the triumphs, the victories of your life, everything you've overcome, everything you've survived, all your successes. How much farther are you today in one aspect of your life or another than you could have ever imagined a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago? When we focus on how far we've come instead of how much farther we need to go, we create the seeds of gratitude which will blossom into the fruits of love and joy. If I put someone behind curtain number 1 and say they're focusing on what's missing in their life, what they can't control in the past, how would you expect them to feel? Where do you think their emotional pillar would be at? I truly believe that 90%, or 99%, I should say, of everything we do is for this pillar. Now, we can teach you methods for changing your state in an instant. It's possible. And if you don't know how to master your state, I suggest you learn that immediately. Most people who want to change focus on their stories, I mean, what I'm trying to say is that most people who want to achieve a great state in their life focus on their stories. They see a therapist and they repeat the same stories they've been telling for years over and over and over again, in the hope that changing the story, they can change their lives and really their state, their quality of life. Other people, they seek for strategy. They want to learn from coaches. They want to learn tactics for getting what they want, and they think that the recipe for success in an area that they're working on will lead to all the riches of life that they truly desire. But few people ever really start with state, when really that's what they need, or that's what they're looking for in the first place. Changing your story and your strategy may change your state, but trust me, it's easy to change your state, then change your story and your strategy. I felt depressed for years, and there was a lot I did to change my story, and a lot I did to change my strategy, and none of it worked, because there was a pattern in my physiology, my language, and focus, which created the conditions for the depression. And when I ended the state, I ended the story. And then the strategy changed. If you want to dive deep into state, go study Tony Robbins. He's the best in the world at this, and in my opinion has made more progress in the science of personal fulfillment than anyone since Aristotle. And here's the truth, and the theme we're going to keep returning to. Focusing on one pillar is a recipe for failure. It's almost always the cause of an unbalance in your life and in the other pillars. And while you can ultra fortify this emotional pillar so that you put yourself in a resourceful state all the time, if you're not working on the others, you're going to be living in a constantly crumbling house because you'll be trying to fill a bucket with a hole at the bottom. And I promise you, you will burn out. It's not sustainable. So think about these 8 pillars as the 8 essential nutrients of life. With them, we can be well functioning at our peak. Without them, we're going to suffer in some way, probably without knowing why. Thus, these 8 pillars are like a map, a checklist to see what's working in my life and what isn't. See, there's a great joke about a drunk who looked for his keys under a streetlight because the house was dark. And I see so many people earnestly trying to create breakthroughs in their life in the wrong direction simply because they don't know any better. A rocking horse makes a ton of motion but zero progress. And in the wise words of Abraham Maslow, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Our goal is to give you a whole toolkit so you can start building your dream now. In Paradise Lost, John Milton writes, the mind is its own place, and in itself, interesting words here, can make a heaven of hell or a hell of heaven. Oh, the mind! The mind is a garden. Thoughts are the seeds. You can grow flowers or you can grow weeds. That precious, precious garden. And holding true to the metaphor, yes, the mind is where all the BS is stored. The BS, the bullshit or belief systems. Take your pick. We can either use our minds or let our minds use us. And that's what it means to wake up. There's a story about an ancient yogi who opened his eyes during a meditation at dawn and before him saw a 15-foot coiled black cobra ready to strike. He closed his eyes again to pray, and when he opened them in the sunlight, he could see it wasn't a snake at all, but a coiled rope, and instantly he was enlightened. You see, the mind matters most. It matters most. What you know about the world will directly determine your experience of the world. Shakespeare said it best in A Midsummer Night's Dream, and his imagination bodies forth the forms of things unknown. Forms of things unknown. The poet's pen turns them to shape and gives to airy nothing a local habitation, place to be, and a name. If you're listening to this now, your brain has been uploaded with about 6,000 years of technology, most of which is invisible to you and which you take for granted. Almost nothing about how we function as 21st century civilized, computer-wielding people is innate. Even the ability to count past 2 would be impossible for us if someone hadn't taught us. It's difficult to imagine, but the Piraha tribe in the Amazon have a word for 1, 2, then many, and literally cannot perform any calculations. They have the same computer as any of us, just different software. There was an image that blew up the internet recently of a dress, which, if you're like some people, was clearly white and gold, and if you're like other people, clearly black and blue. You remember this one? It's mind-blowing, but what's even more mind-blowing is that up until a few thousand years ago, human beings couldn't even see blue. Whoa, wait, what do you mean? How could someone not see blue? Well, check this out. Jules Davidoff, a psychologist from Goldsmiths University of London, worked with the Himba tribe from Namibia, who still don't have a word for blue, and no real distinction between green and blue in their language. Now, to go back one farther paragraph, in ancient Greek in Homer's time, there was no mention of blue. There was only the wine-dark sea. There was no mention of the color of the sky. And in none of the literature of the time do we ever see a word for blue. Now, to see if they could actually identify the color blue, Jules basically had 12 squares. 11 were green and one was painfully blue. And guess what? They couldn't identify the one blue square out of all the 12 squares, 11 green squares. And it goes both ways because the Himba have almost triple the amount of words for green as we do. And we're able to distinguish one slightly, just shade different green square from 11 similar green squares. And guess what? They got it right every time, whereas Westerners failed every time. So to bring it back to the lion in the last pillar, how many of you have had the experience of changing the way you see a thing and the thing changes? Being startled in the middle of the night that an intruder is standing in the room only to realize that it's just a coat and hat sitting on the back of a chair. If you change the way you see a thing, the whole thing changes. Most of us think we're experiencing reality. Not true. We experience our own interpretations of reality. You have 2 eyes, 1 nose, 1 mouth, 2 ears, senses, and your skin. Any stimulus in the world is being processed through your unique nervous system, the doors of perception. One person looks at a dog and sees a pet, another sees a threat, and another sees food. And it's not even quite that simple. For example, no depressed person ever thinks they put on a gray veil and are seeing the world through the haze of a bad mood. No, not at all. They think that the veil has been taken away, the veil of happiness, and that they're finally seeing the world truly. We can't call what we do integral fitness without a brief mention of Ken Wilber's integral theory. And without getting into a full exegesis on spiral dynamics, stages of development, and the Wilber-Combs matrix, all really cool stuff, let me say that the reason why this may be hard to digest or fully understand, or the reason why you may be getting a bad taste in your mouth right now, is because society has taught us our entire life a story about functional or ontological fixedness. Here is the way things are. We've even been taught science as though scientific method of falsification yielded absolute truth. And scientific materialism has become the new in vogue intellectual standard of reason. Popper would be kind of rolling around in his grave right now, because it's not. Dogma is dogma, and dogma is a beautiful thing, but I bet if you're watching this video, or if you're like me, you've been consistently unsatisfied with dogmatic answers, not because they aren't comforting, but because they're not true. For thousands of years, people could not beat a 4-minute mile. 4-minute mile. The Greeks tied men to horses, and modern scientists devised special suits and shoes. And then finally, experts said it was just impossible. Then, all of a sudden, between 1954 and 1959, over 20 people broke the 4-minute mile. All it took was one man, Roger Bannister, to prove it was possible for the first time in history. And literally 6 weeks later, that's it, just 6 weeks later, his record was broken by John Landy. Then about 7 months later, that record was broken by 2 more people, Laszlo Tabori-Hun and Chris Chataway. And it's continued to be broken ever since. And now a 4-minute mile is the new standard of men's middle distance running, and about 10 to 20 American men break the 4-minute mile for the first time each year. Worldwide, that number might be like 3 to 5 times as large. I mean, kids are doing this in high school today. The mind establishes the context of our reality, and it also reads the map to shift it. For example, how many people know about the 6 levels of change? On top is the environment, a great place to start. Sometimes it's just as easy as, if it's raining here, move over there. But as they say, you can take the man out of Pittsburgh, but you can't always take Pittsburgh out of the man. Behavior, number 2, or I guess 5. Someone else's or our own. A man walks into a doctor and says, "Doc, it hurts every time I do this." And the doctor says, "Well, then stop doing that." Sometimes it can be that easy. The next is capability. Sometimes we just don't know something. If you're trying to solve a geometric equation and you don't know the formula of the area of a circle is pi r squared, then it doesn't matter how hard you pray, how hard you try, you're not going to solve it. The next is belief. As the famous words go, whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right. Researchers have found that just believing you're going to do worse on a math exam makes you do worse. And similarly, in one of my favorite studies of all time, making a child chosen at random think that they're special leads them to actually outperforming their peers. It's amazing. And next is identity. One layer deeper, identity. You see, someone can believe that smoking is bad or eating junk food isn't good for them. But if smoking or eating junk food is part of their identity, then they'll keep doing this. See, I used to be a vegetarian and a raw foodist for years, and I can tell you the single key to determining whether or not someone stuck with it was how they identified themselves. If someone saw himself as a meat eater who was deciding to eat vegetables for a while, they wouldn't last very long. Instead, if someone strongly identified meat with toxic poisoning, eating it as a sin punishable by death or shaming, and themselves as an absolute pure vessel of the light, you could guarantee they wouldn't touch meat even if they were starving. Identity does more to shape behavior than beliefs or capability. Finally, even below that is spirit. Spirit. This is our core beneath identity. This goes beyond identity. It's not what we are, a doctor, a lawyer, a son, an artist, a vegetarian, a meat eater. It's who we are, what our purpose is, why we're here. A change here changes everything. There are the road to Damascus experiences of our life where we go from Paul to Saul, or Saul to Paul, where literally everything we ever valued is inverted. We may wear the same body, but we're not the same person. One of my favorite examples of this is a man named Charles Mulley. I truly consider this man to be not only a modern day hero, but the closest thing I've seen to a modern day saint. He went from a homeless beggar to the richest man in Kenya, and then decided to give his entire fortune away to raise orphan children. And since then has raised over 10,000 children and literally transformed the desert where they live into a rainforest. It's an amazing story, and I suggest you all watch the documentary about his life. Amazing spiritual transformation. Or take Noah Levine, the founder Against the Stream Buddhism. He went from a thug snorting crack in and out of jail to Buddhist monk and a leading mindfulness teacher. It's amazing. You see, just knowing these layers can severely influence your life. And it's not just a frame, but frames are important. As Deepak Chopra would say, human beings have about 60,000 thoughts a day to frame their reality. The problem is that they're usually the same 60,000 thoughts they had yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that, and maybe their whole lives. We love novelty, but we're allergic to change. It feels uncomfortable at first, but it's like stretching. If you can't, you must. The harder it is for you to touch your toes, the more important it is for you to do it. The resistance, that tightness, is an indicator of the importance of the act. It is that gateway to growth. See, I used to be terribly afraid of cold calling and rejection. I was seeing each rejection as a nail through my skin. And yes, it may have been a battle wound, and I might have been earning my stripes, but I wasn't excited for the next call. Then someone gave me a whole new frame to try on. They asked me, about how many phone calls do you need to make before you would expect to close one? I said, well, obviously if I made 100, I'd be guaranteed to have at least one deal close. Great, they said. And about how much money would that one deal be worth? I said, sheesh, it could be worth about $10,000. Great, they said. So now take the amount you'd make and divide it by the number of people you'd have to reach out to in order to make that deal. So 10,000 divided by 100, that's $100. Then he said, instead of looking at it like you have to endure the randomness of 100 rejections before you land the deal, instead what's really happening is that you're actually making $100 for each person who says no, because it's getting you one step closer to yes. And now that was a radically different frame. From then on, every time I picked up the phone, instead of thinking, oh shoot, are they gonna say yes or no? I said, I hope this person says no fast so I can make my $100 and move on. And guess what? It took less than 100 phone calls to close those deals. So I was making more money than 100 for each no I heard. Radically different frame, radically different results. If our paradigm is off, if if our perspective is uncalibrated, we're going to be heading towards the rocks and not the shore. Now, how is that like your life? Where are you holding yourself back? Where are you telling yourself a story about what you can't do instead of about what you can do? Where are you damming up the reservoirs of energy and happiness solely because it doesn't fit in with your current belief system? What does it take to break that spell? I don't believe any of us would rationally choose a disempowering belief system, but the problem is that we're blind to any possibility that subreps the vision of life we've trusted. As I mentioned before, it takes a leap of faith to adopt a new paradigm or a severe crisis, and it's usually the latter. Think about your life and think back to some of the biggest turning points of your existence. Chances are you weren't wonderful and decided, oh hey, I'm gonna take it up a notch. No. Chances are you were in a crisis, pushed against a brick wall at the limit of your fire corridor and surrendered to a new choice. And voila, it worked out fantastically. But you couldn't believe it at the time. You just did it because it was necessary. See, here's an interesting question. When do people change? Really, ask it honestly. When do people change? When do I change? Or anyone else in my life for that matter? The answer is when they have to. If we remember this, others' behavior and even our own won't seem so mysterious and counterintuitive. We all have different bottoms. I personally have developed a shallow bottom for myself, so I hit it fast and start swimming up for dear life as soon as possible. And some people never find their bottom, and they just keep sinking towards it in a never-ending abyss. It's not a reality, it's a choice. I don't study physics and psychology and gaze at my navel and try too many drugs and one day touch my bottom and know it for good. That's why so many don't find theirs. Instead, I just put a stake in the ground somewhere, anywhere, and say, this is it. This is my limit. And just like we can look at a map and see the clear boundaries and dividing lines, when we're in it, all that flies out the window, and it's up to us alone to choose, am I here or am I there? With a chorus of voices behind us to argue otherwise. See, most of us have old operating systems installed in our brains. Certain knowledge is transformational. It doesn't just tickle our minds, it upgrades our actual capacities. Mathematics and language are two examples. Like I said, numbers are not innate. The fact that you can count to 10 means you have a highly developed software upgrade already inside your skull. Cut out language, kiss your ability to navigate from Los Angeles to San Francisco. Goodbye. Compare this to the Pita tribe in the Amazon. The software, technology, the average Westerner carries between our ears is highly sophisticated and more powerful at computing the world. With that said, it's often said that we only use 10% of our brains. Well, this is about as true as if I told you that most people only use 10% of their bodies, meaning they're only using about 10% of their body's potential. They're lazy and overweight, and they could be athletic. Maybe they could even be Olympic. Mastering this pillar of the mind is giving you a mental software update. It doesn't take too long to install it either. Once you get it, you don't look at the world the same. Your vision will literally be expanded. When I said earlier in my first video that I had literally learned and passed a 4-year placement exam of Spanish in a month, that was only possible because I upgraded my capacity in order to learn and remember things. Now, when we truly learn to see the invisible forces that shape our destiny, we can use them instead of being used by them. It's like stepping into the matrix. Upgrading our mind is about transforming the invisible. It's about transforming the invisible. 5,000 years ago, the average Athenian would have seen storm clouds approaching and thought, Iolaus is coming, and prayed. Today, we check our weather apps in the morning, and we figure it out from there. The Pita tribe in the Amazon can't count to 3, and today the New York Stock Exchange trades for about 2,800 companies in 12 different currencies. Just think that 1,000 years ago, if you had a headache, doctors would drill a hole in your skull to release the pressure. With the wrong mental model, nothing fits. Nothing will go right in your life. And you're going to suffer unnecessarily experiencing the same raw data of life, but processing it with an inferior operating system. The right paradigm is like a magical map that turns the invisible forces that shape your reality into visible forces you can work with to transform yourself and others. I spent years in college obsessed with invisible forces. These are the forces that really do influence our life. After being floored by a visual illusion that boggled my mind, I developed a simple hunch. If I could be so easily influenced and misled by a visual illusion, could there be such a thing, maybe, as cognitive, spiritual, philosophical, or emotional illusions as well? And what I found out is that there were quite a few of them. There's a lot more I could get into here with illusions as a passion of mine. For example, why do almost 100% of Austrians register to donate their organs, where only about 10% of Germans donate their organs? Really think about this. What's different about Austria and Germany? What's different about their politics, their culture, the history of their people maybe? Or let's make it a bit weirder. In Denmark, only 5% of their people register to donate their organs, and in Sweden, about 90% of their people are organ donors. There's a reason here, and there's a right answer, so think about it. Germany 10%, Sweden 90%. Can you think of it? Here's a hint, okay? This might help you. The UK is about 17%. Think about it. Have you figured it out yet? Who guessed culture, history, religion, politics? And who guessed that it's the difference between one word on the DMV slip? Check here if you do want to be an organ donor in the Germany and the UK. And check here if you don't want to be an organ donor in Sweden and Austria. Almost 100% of the variation in organ donating has nothing to do with belief, goodness, reason, rationality, or ideology, and has everything to do with default options, the results we get by doing nothing. What other default options shape our life? Most people think they have beliefs, but more often their beliefs have them. We're shaped by the world around us in ways that the uneducated person can't fathom. And with the wrong paradigm, we're pretty much bound to be a victim in the world when we could just as easily become a victor. And while you may be tempted to think that people go with the default option because they're being careless, you're actually wrong. People go with default options precisely because they do care, don't know what to do, and feel crushed under the pressure of making the wrong decision. So they just go with the flow, the default option. Have you ever just waited in a line for no reason, but other people were waiting in that line only to find out that the line was closed and another one was open there you could have just walked right up to? And if you really want to scare yourself a bit, imagine how one small question on the DMV slip can influence the fate of millions of people in a country, and how many larger, more important decisions are being made like this by people as intelligent as you and I. And of course, no one thinks that they're guilty of behaving like this. Everyone thinks they're making the right, reasonable, well thought out decision. And in truth, we are, with a key distinction, given the information they have. In the book 1984, George Orwell said that whoever controls the past controls the future, and whoever controls the present controls the past. In the 1940s and 50s, I don't know how to even say this word, but DDT was introduced to American public to kill bugs that spread malaria and typhus in several parts of the world. Ads went out with smiling animals singing, "DDT is good for me," and trucks used to stroll down urban lanes spraying thick clouds of miasmic poison while children danced around and played in the fumes. Now, I highly doubt any of the parents would have let their play in DDT poison clouds if they had known just a little bit better. But that's just the problem. History is constantly revealing itself to us on the wrong side of today. And unless we're making a constant effort to inform ourselves and get ahead, we'll be washed up in the white noise and inertia of the masses and paralyzed in fear of challenging the tyranny of the majority. In 1784, Immanuel Kant defined enlightenment as having the courage to use your own reason. Enlightenment is having the courage to use your own reason. Now, I've always been so humbly touched by this because some of the greatest innovations of all time came from outsiders rejected by the authorities of the time. And until a person has a direct experience of the fallibility of expert opinions, which forces them to think for themselves, we'll continue to live in a world where people will commit atrocities against their better judgment in the name of the law and the good and the right. Steve Jobs put it best when he said, when you grow up, you tend to get told the world is the way it is, and your life is just to live your life inside the world. Try not to bash into the walls too much. Try to have a nice family, have fun, save a little money. But see, that's a limited life. Life can be so much broader once you discover one simple fact. Everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you, and you can change it. You can influence it. You can build your own things that other people can use. And once you learn that, you'll never be the same again. The main lesson here is that there is free will and determinism. Yes, your life is completely determined by three fates: biological determinism, the presets of your genes and inherent nervous system; psychological determinism, your heredity, upbringing, your needs, rules, and values; and environmental determinism, default options, restrictions, and mobilities. That is, until you decide to wake up and wield your ultimate freedom, because hidden between every stimulus and response is the choice to do things differently. Not everyone finds this freedom, but no one can take it away from you. And even if we have the right view, if I can't teach this to my friends, my parents, my children, and everyone I come into contact with, well then, to paraphrase the wise words of Hillel, if I'm only for myself, then who will be for me? And we'll talk more about that when we get into the social contribution pillar, but for now, let's move into the body, baby. Here are a few things to think about for your body. I'll keep this section brief because it's probably the most boring for you. Like, are you breathing? What's the most vital nutrient? It's oxygen. You can go weeks without food, days without water, but only minutes without oxygen. And are you drinking water? Most people need about 1 to 2 liters per day. Your body is 80% water. You can drink a gallon. Without it, we stop working. When it comes to eating, there are lots of theories. But here are some things to bear in mind. Are you getting all your vitamins and minerals from natural food sources? Are you getting all the essential amino acids your body needs? Are you getting all the essential fatty acids, omega-3s and 6s your brain needs? Are you getting enough fat, carbs, and proteins in the right ratio? How many vegetables and raw vegetables are you eating per day? What about the portions of your food? Are you eating 3 decent sized meals a day or 11? Are you feeling energetic or lethargic? Next, are you exercising? It's essential to have at least some aerobic exercise every day. Simple. Now, how are you sleeping? Are you getting at least 7 to 10 hours? Or are you buying into the myth that you can survive on 4 hours of sleep? You can't. What does sleep deprivation and drunk driving have in common? Everything. You think you're doing a great job, but really you're severely impaired. And what's your body posture like? Your physiology will directly relate to your emotional and cognitive state. To prove it, let's imagine someone behind curtain number 1 again. If I were to tell you that they're suicidally depressed, forget what's going on in their skull. How would they stand? How would they talk? What would their facial expressions be like? How would they breathe? Where would they be looking? You see, there are patterns to different physiological and emotional states. And the chances are that whatever you're imagining in your head was probably similar to what I would imagine in my head, and what anyone next to you would imagine in their head. Physiology is just linked with mood and unresourceful states, like sadness, shame, or even anger. There are patterns to these things, just like there are patterns of curiosity, wonder, and love. In one of my favorite experiments around cognitive embodiment, researchers found that literally putting a pencil in your mouth like this activates your zygomaticus major, which is basically the same muscle you use to laugh and smile, literally making you happier. So what you've learned is that instead of having to feel good to do good, you can literally start doing good to feel good. And sometimes that's the only way to start. And there are really a lot more ways of hijacking your physiology to create resourceful states. Like incantations, which can use your entire body, voice, and mind to activate joy and passion. And I use these literally all the time, anytime I need a quick biochemical change. It works. And I would give you an example right now, but I would literally wake up the entire neighborhood where I'm shooting this video. So moving on, human beings were not designed to sit at desks looking at blue screens. So how often are you moving per day, per hour? And how often are you being touched or touching others? We have a need to be touched. Did you know that? That infants literally die or develop serious developmental issues from lack of physical contact. So look up lack of touch and failure to thrive or something like that if you don't believe me. And how often are you stretching? Physical tightness doesn't just lead to deficiencies in a sport, but as I said earlier about cognitive embodiment, everything is connected. Tightness in your upper back can cause tightness in your mind. And what's your level of stress at? Stress murders millions of people per year. Are you in touch with where you feel it or carry it in your body? Are you in tune with your body at all? Can you check into your own gut reaction to things and feel your primal wisdom? Do you know how to use your voice? Do you know how to breathe? Lots of elements of the body, and there's a lot more we can explore, but let's move on. So now we're going to talk about the environment pillar. And this basically covers the material circumstances of your life, where you are, who you're surrounded by, your relationships, community, your things, how much traffic you experience on the way to work, how you get to work. And there's the physical, material component to environment, and then there's also the emotional relationship component of love, friendship, and community. And we're just going to kind of breeze through this one too. I think that the writer Tennessee Williams put the importance of the latter best when he said, "The world is violent and mercurial. The world is violent and mercurial. It will have its way with you. We are saved only by love, only by love. The love for each other and the love that we pour into the art we feel compelled to share. Being a parent, being a writer, being a painter, being a friend. We live in a perpetually burning building, and what we must save for it, what we must save for it and from it all the time is love." But in speaking about love, what level of love and relationship do you have in your life? How many dimensions of love are you experiencing? The Greeks had 7 words for love, 7, from eros to storge to agape. And in English, we have about 1 word to define love, and a whole range of behaviors and feelings and attachments which can be commensurate to this singular experience which many people find life's purpose in. As Joseph Campbell put it, the man behind Follow Your Bliss, the greatest privilege of a lifetime is to love. See, it's easy to spot selfish love, the narcissist in our life who could care less about what they could give us than what we could give to them. And it's easy to fall into a quality of love, playing games like tit for tat, I'll take care of this and you take care of that. But it's hard to see the value of polarity and how to keep intimacy alive in a relationship that has incurred a series of deep responsibilities, or to fully understand the ways in which equality kills intimacy and turns passion into a burden. Do you know the mechanism of passion and excitement in relationships and how to create them? It's an important thing to figure out. Your environment has a direct impact on your levels of happiness, your attitude, your mood, and the decisions you make. Speaking about default options earlier, choosing to be unaware of your environment is practically committing yourself to environmental determinism, either because of the uninformed decisions you're making or because of how basically the uninformed decisions of others influence you. So here are some ideas from the literature to chew on. The amount of time it takes you to get to work, especially through traffic, is inversely proportionate to happiness levels. People exposed to a bad smell, and even unaware of the smell, tend to judge others more critically and harshly. Gloomy weather makes people gloomy. Sunny weather makes people sunny. It's trite, but it's true and backed by scientific research. You'll hear me say it's not about your resources, it's about your resourcefulness. But resources do matter. If you have wood lying around, it's a lot easier to build a bridge than if you don't. So mastering this pillar can be as easy as getting a more comfortable bed, or changing the color of your clothes, to removing the people in your life who drag you down, or adding new people in your life who challenge you to become more of who you really are. And there's way more we could say about that, but I'm moving right on to communication, one of my favorite subjects in the world. And to begin, I have a very important question for you. Do you brush your teeth? I mean, really, like twice a day status. Okay, do your parents brush their teeth? What about your friends, your lovers? What's the result? Probably most people you know brush their teeth. But how long ago do you think humans started brushing their teeth? 10,000 years ago, at the dawn of the Neolithic era, during the invention of agriculture? Maybe 4,000 years ago, around the time of the Greeks? Or 2,000 years ago, during the time of Christ? Or how about 1,000 years ago? 500 years ago? What if it was only 100 years ago? Which may sound like a long time ago, but really it's just 2 generations, around the 1920s. Can you freaking believe that? Today, not brushing your teeth is like a sin. It's one of the most tried and true habits Westerners have, almost as deeply ingrained as flushing the toilet after a poo. And just 100 years ago, nobody brushed their teeth. You don't believe me? During the draft of World War I, so many recruits had rotting teeth that the US government was concerned that, and basically labeled tooth decay as a national security risk. Understanding why we brush our teeth is understanding communication. Because one man, Claude C. Hopkins, one of the most famous advertisers of all time and all but forgotten today, is 100% to blame. So what did Hopkins do that was so brilliant? As a challenge to himself, he took a failing product, Pepsodent, which almost nobody would use because it was a toothpaste and nobody brushed their teeth, and created one of the most effective advertising campaigns of all time to establish a cue reward pattern that was so addicting that now, 100 years later, almost the entire freaking world brushes their teeth. That's the power of communication. It's the power to influence not just others, but ourselves. And the success of Hopkins and so many other brilliant communicators, or people who can motivate themselves and others to great things, is not a mystery. It's an art, yes, but there are rules and a science behind communication. Effective expression, language patterns, and influence. You see, we communicate to create clarity, and clarity is power. If I asked you, who is the most influential man in American politics in the last 100 years? This man changed an entire generation of people and the future of our nation. Life is better for all people today because of him. During his time, there were segregated water fountains and bathrooms, Jim Crow laws. His influence directly led to racial equality throughout the entire United States and the evolution of moral consciousness throughout the world. Do you know who I'm thinking about yet? His birthday is a national holiday we celebrate on the third Monday of January. This man had a dream and led 250,000 people in a march in front of the Lincoln Memorial buildings in one of the most iconic moments of our nation's history, which helped pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964. If you're thinking Martin Luther King Jr. by now, you're right. And what was this man's superpower? What was he known for? How did he touch and influence so many people? He was quite literally one of the best orators of all time. His speeches inspired millions of people, both black and white, to not only care about civil rights, but to do something about it. His words went absolutely viral, and this was years before the internet, Twitter, Facebook, or other social media. His power of communication, the clarity he created around the issues he fought for, from the words he used, and more importantly, from the messages he communicated, not just orally, but through action, changed the world, changed the entire world, and ushered in a new era of peace. Now, if our communication can help and heal the world and our relationships, it can also destroy them. Yeah, there are people with selfish intentions who are masters at communication that use it to harm and not to help, but they're actually a very rare exception, because the problem is most people don't know how to communicate. They don't know how to say what they mean or mean what they say, and this creates problems which should never really have existed in the first place, either petty conflicts or literally mass hysteria. Understanding that what you hear is what I mean is the key to improving the quality of all your relationships. Understanding that what you hear is what I mean is the key. Now, we'll give that a second to click in a bit, because you see, I had a girlfriend once who used to describe the things she liked with the word nice. And so nice when she really liked something. She obviously didn't have the same fifth grade teacher as I had, because I'd been so drilled at an early age that nice was a graveyard word that I could only use it as a euphemism for, wow, that kind of sucks, but I don't want to tell you that. And she used it all the freaking time. Now, what did this do to our relationship? Quick, was it good or bad? If you guess bad, you're right. She dropped nice like a nuclear bomb on any moment, and that grew into a tiny ripple, and then that grew into a full-fledged chain reaction, leading our skin to flip as repellent as two sides of a magnet that don't want to touch. And it would happen so fast, neither of us could even laugh at how silly the cause was. Nice. Nice, just a freaking word. She thought that she was being loving, and I heard nails scratching against a chalkboard. You see, when I say green, what do you see? Do you think you and I are seeing the same green? Now, is that a problem? Well, it is when you're decorating a house, and you may think right now, but I'm not decorating a house. And you're wrong. Every communication is a comment or a request, and we don't think about this until we hit a snag and stop hearing each other, or more specifically, until someone fails to meet our needs and we encounter steadfast resistance. See, I've helped a lot of people with their relationships, and invariably, they always think that there's a problem, like a real problem there. For example, the other person is doing something that needs to be fixed, or that there's something wrong with the other person. It's usually the other person. When what I almost always see is that there's a massive failure to communicate, which cycles into a destructive tit-for-tat syndrome that would make John Nash cry. If you want to see how quickly failure to communicate can catalyze into a problem, like a real problem that isn't real because it's based on this failure to communicate, go jump into an Uber, and when your driver starts talking to you, respond back in complete non sequiturs. He says something like, "How are you today?" And you say, "Did you check the tire pressure on your car last night?" It won't take very long. Trust me, something will blossom. And the big joke here is that most of the time, people in a relationship, whether it's a friendship, family relationship, a loving or sexual relationship, want the same thing. They want to create win-wins to get their needs met and also meet your needs. Unless, of course, they're a complete narcissist, in which case it's a longer discussion. But isn't that a relief? Isn't it such a relief to know that most people want to help us get our needs met too, so long as their own needs are met, and met first? Notice the key word there, first. That's the secret to getting what you want. You'll get more of what you want when you learn to start helping other people get what they want first. But we're all guilty of this and not doing this, right? Wanting our needs met first. So instead of trying to communicate, we try to be understood. Like when a mistake is made, and instead of being loving, we try to convince the other person why we weren't wrong. And how well does that work towards making anything right? It doesn't. Get this right now. It's important. You can either be right or in love. You can't have both. If you want both, in the words of Pat Allen, you're a narcissist, because you think that you being right is being loving, but it's not, it won't be, it never will be. Sorry about that. Now, I'm not sharing this stuff with you because it's easy. I'm sharing it with you for you to take charge of your life and get what you want. And just like you're not going to catch a fish by expecting other people to catch a fish for you, you're going to have to learn this stuff and master it for yourself instead of waiting or relying on someone else to master it for you. Take this quote to heart. Things don't change, we change. Your entire life will change, not just personally, but the whole world around you. Your entire life will change if you just start doing now the things you figured other people would do later. Now, that's actually a really good one. Let me say it again. Your entire life will change if you just start doing now the things you figured other people would do later. In Stephen Covey's 7 Habits, he mentions the 5th habit as seek first to understand, then be understood, which is the foundation of creating a win-win. He tells a story about a man who came to see him, devastated about the relationship he had with his son. Mr. Covey, I've tried everything to help my son. I'm not sure what else I can do. I'm so upset about this. Maybe I should just give up. I don't understand him. He never listens to me. And Covey looks at him and says, You don't understand him. He never listens to me. And the man perks up and says, yes, that's it. I don't understand him. He never listens to me. And Covey says, okay, let's try this again. You don't understand your son because he never listens to you. And the man says again, this time a little bit more impatiently, Mr. Covey, that's what I've been trying to tell you. I don't understand him. He never listens to me. And you don't seem to be listening either, pal. And Covey says, well, I thought that in order to understand another person, you need to listen to them. Have you tried listening to him? And the man purses up and says, of course not. I already understand him. I know exactly what he would say. I was just like that at his age. The problem is that he's not listening to me. And you don't seem to understand either. What am I, living in a world of Michigas? And the dialogue is funny precisely because it's familiar. So many people's conversations are just collective monologues where two people project and pretend they understand each other, preparing their next point while they should be listening, without ever really caring to understand what's truly going on inside that other human being. Think about your most charged relationship, someone who you seem to always fight with. Chances are you're more interested in what you have to tell them instead of what they have to tell you. And how can we expect to have a positive relationship with someone who are not able to empathetically listen and understand before we expect them to understand us? See, people are obsessed with taking self-defense classes because they want to be able to protect themselves from physical violence. The martial arts industry alone accounts for $4 billion. And what are the chances that any one of these people is actually going to be physically attacked? Maybe close to zero, maybe more. It depends on where you live. But what about being psychologically or verbally attacked? That's close to 100%, maybe a week. And yet, how much time are you investing in learning how to diffuse conflict or violent communication? Chances are you're never going to need to be able to flip somebody over on their back and put them in a headlock. But conversational judo, that's something you could use daily, which wouldn't just protect you and the people you love, it would help heal the entire world. See, the meaning of our communication is the response we get. Mastering communication is being able to distinguish our own projection from another person so that we can clearly see ourselves and we can clearly see them. I truly believe that resolving miscommunication between people would resolve a significant majority of their problems, and maybe even the problems of the world, problems that are usually solved through artifice, divorce, violence, or abstention. I can't speak to this enough. It's a big mission of mine to help people clarify their communication. I think this is one of the easiest ways people could actively participate in improving the world and their own quality of life. And in all of this, we haven't even dove deep into language itself. Language is the lifeblood of the soul into which thoughts run and out of which they grow. Whether we think we can or think we can't, we're right. And just like seeing, hearing is believing. Like this joke. My great auntie went to the doctor. He said that she had a fissure in her uterus, and if she had a baby, it would be a miracle. So she went back to her husband and said, "You wouldn't believe it! I went to the doctor and he said, you have a fish in your uterus, and if you have a baby, it will be a mackerel." You can have a giant flea and a tiny elephant, and I'll still understand what you mean. Language is complicated and messy, and I'll never forget these wise words of language from one of my mentors of philosophy at USC, Dallas Willard. He was talking about love. And he said, and he had this thick Southern accent, you don't love chocolate cake. You just want to eat it." And I think that pretty much sums up how beautiful, sharp, imprecise, and necessary language is for communication. And I think that all just generally sums up the importance of this communication pillar. George Harrison once sang, "If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there." I mean, maybe worse than that. Have you ever been heading straight down one path only to find you're going the complete opposite wrong way? If we're going to talk about business, leadership, or achievement, we have to understand that there's been more innovation in the last decade than there has been in the last century. And let's run through some pivotal moments. Google and the Internet of Search launched only in 1998. And between 2000 and 2010, we saw the birth of Facebook, Apple TV, Netflix streaming, Twitter, smartphones, the App Store, and YouTube. And between 2010 and today, we've seen the birth of Instagram, Amazon Prime, Instant Video, Chromecast, Spotify, and the next generation of Apple Music. Entire industries have been turned upside down by the internet and the new startup economy. Kodak had been in operation since 1888, over 100 years, with close to 10,000 employees. And in one single year, it was completely bankrupt by 13 kids in San Francisco who had a little app called Instagram. We have to be primed for victory. Standards today have changed. If you're fighting a new battle in an old way, you're going to lose the war. The nature of imperialism in the world today has completely changed. England is no longer a conquering nation, out there conquering nation states and converting them to serve the crown. Instead, isolated pockets of individuals are forging their own revolutionary war against the incumbents in almost every industry. And if history has any lessons to tell us, the Patriots beat the Redcoats because they practiced guerrilla tactics instead of challenging the antiquated, absurd, competitive firing lines of the Queen's Army. This analogy is pretty brutal to be sure, but it's accurate. In my parents' generation, from the 60s all the way until about the 90s, the cool thing for a kid to do was to start a band, to start a counterculture revolution, to bring down the man with a song that would change a lifetime. The rock bands of the 21st century are the startup businesses today. You have your lead singer, your CEO, your drummer, back-end developer, the guitarist, the UI designer, and the bassist, your sales officer. Millions of kids all over the world with a laptop and a smartphone are starting businesses with the sole intent of becoming disruptive, which is just a euphemism for the idea that they are waging war against incumbent businesses and industries. And it's all in good humor until about 100 or 10,000 people lose their jobs, like Instagram and Kodak. And I'm not complaining about this. It's innovation, but I am saying it's an opportunity and a warning. And if you don't know the rules of the game today, you're the Redcoats fighting the Patriots. You may be superior in every way except in the one that matters, strategy. You see, we're all dreamers, but it's not about dreaming today. It's about turning your vision into reality. Today, when someone achieves the impossible, it's called a dream. And when they just sit around thinking about it, it's called procrastination. Again, we have to be able to take the invisible, here's the theme, and turn it into reality. That's magic, and it's also the way things are today. This pillar is about your understanding strategy and value. Now, have you heard of the Wizard of Schenectady? It's a great story. Ford Motor Company was having an issue with a gigantic generator. Not knowing what else to do, losing millions of dollars at the time, Ford said, I need the best. I need the best right now. So he called in the Wizard of Schenectady, Charles Proteus Steinmetz. Upon arriving, Steinmetz rejected all assistance and asked only for a notebook and a pencil. He got to work, got to thinking, inspecting the machine, then asked for a ladder. He climbed up to the generator and made a small chalk mark on the side and told Ford's engineers, turn this bolt, and then left. The engineers did what he said, and boom, it all worked to perfection. A few weeks later, he sent Ford the bill, $10,000. Ford was shocked. It's equivalent to close to $1 million today. Ford acknowledged Steinmetz, obviously. He was successful, but he was a little surprised by this figure. The whole process probably took him all of an hour, so Ford asked for an itemized bill. The Wiz, responding personally, sent him a bill that said, making chalk mark on generator, $1. Knowing where to make the mark, $9,999. You see, it's knowing which bolt to turn, not the time it takes to turn it. Ford paid the bill. If you're running a business or achieving a dream or running your life, what gets managed is what's being measured. But without a metric for success, you're already failing. We have to know what to do and when to do it. Then we have to fuel it with the passion that drives action. There's no absolute rule that says your metric of success for business needs to be making a lot of money. It could be changing lives. It could be creating your own happiness. It could be creating peace in the Middle East. Business is defined as a person's regular occupation, profession, or trade. And there's no narrow stretch to what that can mean. Do you remember in grade school when someone would get nosy and another person would turn to them and say, that's none of your business, it's none of ya? Well, what was that business? I'm sure it's a lot different than the way you think of business today. And what if your business was to make yourself and others happy? What if that was your chief concern? And yes, we live in a world, and yes, we have to make money, and money is a means, it's an important means, but it's not an ends. I know plenty of people who have more money than they can ever spend in their life, and they're too sick and beat down to enjoy it. Could they have had the same job, made the same amount, but made enjoying life their business instead of wasting it? I don't know. It's just a thought. And with that said, I often ask people, what's your triangle? Our lives are often ruled by three things. What we do to make money, our job, what we do for passion, and what we do for social good. It's an interesting question. I encourage you to ask other people about that. And no matter what you do, momentum is everything. You can ride farther and faster with small wins and achieve things you never thought was possible with small, little incremental gains as opposed to huge quantum leaps. In my own personal work, I've learned two fundamental truths to any business, artist development, product, anything. One, start with where you're at, and two, create something you want to use. If success means going from 0 to 100, too many people start with 2, creating something that they want to use, and fail because they never take the first step. Instead, they try to go from 50 to 100 and wonder why it's not working. They don't want to start with one, the first step, the first thing close in, the step they don't want to take. Others start exactly where they're at. They take the first step, but they create something that they wouldn't want to buy, let alone use, and somehow expect others to buy it. Not going to work. 2 simple rules, don't break them. Start with where you're at. 2, create something you want to use. And if you start by doing what's necessary, then do what's possible, suddenly you're doing the impossible. Don't be fooled when we call this pillar business, because what it's really about is right action, getting what you want, and knowing how. Now, how do most people get what they want in life? They set goals. And I'm warning you now, as we begin to talk about this, goals are dangerous. Goals should be handled like nitroglycerin. You see, I believe there are no lazy people, only impotent goals. If you don't believe me, let me explain. Have you ever been up with a friend one night, late one night, maybe a special friend, and you started thinking, this is interesting. And next thing you know, you're up all night to get lucky? Now, that was a motivating goal. You probably weren't even tired. Where did all the time go? I bet if you were dead tired right now, you'd perk up immediately if your celebrity crush paid you a surprise visit and wanted to, talk. I think what you're getting from that is that the right goal can be extremely motivating for us. And maybe even instead of being used by triggers like this, we can actually use triggers like this to motivate ourselves towards any goal we want to achieve. But understand there's a dark side to this too. Let's take the same example. Sometimes it's easy to get carried away with the thrill of the goal that you end up getting too much of what you don't really want and regretting it afterwards. In other words, we chase sex and we find we want a real connection. Or we chase money and we find out we wanted happiness. Or we chased happiness and we find out we wanted love and acceptance. You see, everything we do is for a state and a status. A state being emotion, happy, mad, glad, sad, angry, inspiration. And a status being, I have this car, this girlfriend, this much money. And we expect, we always seem to, that having a certain status will give us a state. But when it doesn't, we feel empty and unfulfilled. I thought if I just achieved this, I would feel that. And the thing is, you might, but only for a moment. See, as Alan Watts said, find what you love and do that. And do that and forget the money, because if you say that getting money is the most important thing, you'll spend your life completely wasting your time. You'll be doing things you don't like doing in order to go on living. That is, to go on doing things you don't like doing, which is stupid. Better to have a short life that is full of what you like doing than a long life spent in a miserable way. And he also said, if happiness always depends on something expected in the future, we are chasing a will-o'-the-wisp that ever eludes our grasp until the future and ourselves vanish into the abyss of death. Whew, man, powerful stuff. Now, here's a way to stay motivated, to stay on the path. Most people spend their life looking forward, at least in terms of goals, what they could have, what they want. They focus on the future, their goal. The problem with this is that just like a horse chasing a carrot on a stick hung out in front of them will never reach the thing they're driving towards, the grass is always greener here because we're constantly habituating to the grass we're on and wanting something else. If we focus on the gap between where we are now and where we want to be, we may be excited, we may cross the gap, but we're not going to be fulfilled because there's always another gap to cross, another bridge to cross. Instead, try this exercise. Think back on some goal you've been working towards and been frustrated by. Now, instead of looking forward towards the completion of that goal, look back at all the amazing things you've accomplished leading up to this moment. It doesn't matter how far you've come. Appreciate how far you've come. Just appreciate it. This creates gratitude. And if fulfillment is the fruit of the tree of life, gratitude is the roots that make it thrive. Now, achievement takes action. and knowing what stops it. Now, there's knowing certain productivity hacks and knowing that things like organization is efficiency. Like, think about the mise en scene in French cooking, and that consistency is key. But all in all, the message I want you to take home here is that the goal is to take the invisible and make it visible. That's the stuff of champions. That's the stuff of world shapers. That's the embodiment of destiny. Walt Disney died in 1966. 1966, which was 5 years before Disney World was open to the public for the first time. A reporter commented to Walt's brother Roy at the opening of Disney World, "It's too bad that Walt isn't here to see this." And Roy replied, "We see it today because he saw it first." We see it today because he saw it first. To me, spirit is rooted in states of consciousness or states of awareness. And this isn't like hoodoo voodoo. It's phenomenology, the science of subjective experience. And there are three primary states of consciousness: the gross, subtle, and causal, which are usually associated with their three closest counterparts: waking, sleeping, and dreaming. Further than that, spirit is my ability to appreciate reality and life. And let's start this with a story. There was a big bang, and basically that brought everything to the present. And for your own life, you started off as a sperm from your father and an egg from your mother, and you beat a million, billion, gajillion other sperm to fertilize that one egg, and then you were conceived. A single cell zygote, that was you. And this zygote multiplied 2 cells, 3 cells, 9 cells, 100 cells, until pretty soon it had arms and legs and a head and a tongue to speak and a nervous system, and finally you were born. And now that you're here, take a look at your hands. And if you look a bit deeper at any place, you'll see that you're a collection of 50 trillion cells, 20 trillion atoms in each cell, 1,000 trillion atoms, and when you look super closely, even deeper than that, at the atoms, you'll see it's just energy. And at the point of the Big Bang, 13.7 billion years ago, everything in the universe was pure energy. Human being is a very complex pattern of energy. Now, I look motionless, and I'm moving the speed of light. And I'm the age of the entire universe. Now, take 10 seconds to think about what you're going to do tomorrow. About 10. You just did something no other organism on the planet can do. You just created an alternate reality. Now, take 10 seconds to stop thinking. You can't. Now, this creates a whole new class of human suffering, like jealousy, regret, hope, stress, which no other organism will feel either. When you go to a movie, you totally forget you're in the movie. Then all the lights go on and you're shocked back into reality. Think about it, something like Socrates' or Plato's cave. Subjective experience of color, etc., all of these things happen inside your own head, inside your own consciousness. And when you stop focusing on what's outside and you start focusing on what's inside, how all of that is being created in there. And just like a fish may never realize that it's swimming in water, not all human beings with consciousness can actually fully experience their experience of consciousness. We're not a human being with consciousness, but consciousness which has a human being. Now, there's a lot of other thoughts around this idea, like, for example, a wave is a separate entity in the ocean, but it also is the ocean. It's not separate from it. If we can look at thoughts objectively, we can transcend pure subjectivity into absolute being. It's crazy. Now, there are lots of practices that have been practiced through for years of doing this. There's the neti-neti approach. I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this. But knowing who you truly are is an insight. Experiencing who you are is an awakening. Solving this problem is to awaken. To awaken is to realize I am not this me. From there, I can basically do higher level work in order to train my ego, which I can use as opposed to be used by. This is a part and whole perspective. Every whole is a part of a greater whole, and every whole is made up of parts. When I realize that I am not me, I'm not this ego, then I don't need to hold my 1,000 trillion atoms together, because I'm not separate from the pure energy and consciousness that I come from. Body and mind are just temporary manifestations of energy. I can accept the death of my body and mind, which opens a vast amount of possibility. The voice that says I have to do certain things to be fulfilled loses its power, and everything in life becomes a game. It becomes fun, it becomes play, and we all experience basically what we experienced when we were young and built sandcastles just for fun and, let them be taken by the sea before we learned how to fully plan. Now, close your hand into a fist. Most people think that they're this. Then they realize that they're kind of this. They got all these parts going on. There's things that can happen. Then they realize that there's this. Oh God, it gets a little bit confusing. And then finally, if they make it that far, they realize that they're this. Open completely. When I'm open and have awakened to the big self and can objectively look at the little self, then everything is possible. Now, you don't need to be religious. You don't need to believe in God. You don't have to walk on your knees for miles in the desert or fast for 30 days. You just have to be intelligent. You just have to choose, in the famous words of Einstein, one of two ways to live your life: as if everything is a miracle, or as if nothing is. Spirit is the power to elevate human experience. A cadaver rests on the steel table of a morgue. Same flesh, same blood, and yet the spirit is gone. Spirit is life. It's the difference between staring into a fuzzy clock in the face of a puppy. See, I was a philosopher for years at school, and I thought faith and New Age spirituality was just a load of BS. And frankly, that was because I thought it was disempowering. I wanted the people to own their own self and take charge of their own life. And I had a hard time with this idea of spirit. That was at least during a phase. And during this phase, I was a radical atheist, and I ran the philosophy club, and I invited a man who's a very prominent priest in order to talk about science versus religion. And beforehand, I sent everybody in the club a list of these 32 proofs against the existence of God. I wanted us armed and ready to go, not because I wanted to hurt this man, but I wanted to fully learn. I wanted to really push him against the sharp irons of our minds in order to see whether or not his wisdom could stand the test of our scrutiny. And it did. This was almost a life-changing moment in my life, where essentially, by the end of it, he forced me to consider two things. The first was, do we have a metaphysical need as human beings? And the answer to that, in my mind, was obviously, clearly yes. Every culture throughout all time, regardless of its origin and where it came from or where it started on the planet, all had some sort of spirit in their life. They all had rituals. They all believed in higher powers and different powers and something larger than themselves. Now, the second part of it was, if all spiritual figures, or people that represented spirit as a thing or practice, a theory, whatever you want to call it, were positive role models to us that truly practiced what they preached, would I have such a bad taste in my mouth about it? And what that really forced me to think about was how my own thoughts about a subject were completely influenced by bad teachers of it. Now, all it takes is one bad math teacher to ruin math completely. Some of you might have experienced that. And one bad English teacher to take the fun out of reading. But this really kind of got my brain thinking about what's possible for spirit and how to think about it. And how to think about ritual, for example. So like, think about the best birthday you remember growing up. Think about it. Really, like, go back there. Imagine blowing out the candles. Who's around you? How do you feel? What do you smell? How'd the cake taste? Now, for every other person on the planet, this may have just been another day, another ordinary day. But to you and your friends and your family, there was a real ritual there. The day was spiritually elevated with the significance of worshiping you. There was nothing religious about it, nothing mystical, nothing weird. It was uniquely human. Elevating that day was a spiritual act. It was a truly spiritual act. It was metaphysical. It was a proverbial rain dance around a secular custom. It was an alchemy we all agreed to participate in, or at least the people you were with, an alchemy to affect the quality of the day. For that is the highest among all arts. I don't know one skeptic who doesn't like to be celebrated on their birthday. Dismissing humanistic celebrations isn't being rational. It's being Ebenezer Scrooge. It's another level. You see, we all have this metaphysical need. It's not childish. It's not archaic. It's not ignorant. It's quite possibly the most precious part about what makes us human and capable of marveling at the sublime mystery of life. In Sophocles' Oedipus Rex, the chorus to man starts with the beautiful phrase, anthropo danteron peli. I'm sorry, my ancient Greek is not too good. But it basically means man is the most terrible and awesome of all the creatures. Terrible and awesome because in the Greek tradition, Prometheus stole fire from the gods and instilled in humanity the demiurgic power to generate, organize, and destroy. And as science marches towards an increasingly elaborate picture of the world, where quantum physics, quantum entanglement, and the multiverse continue to develop with their spooky corollaries as the rules of our reality, and where Wallace Stevens' words continue to ring true that God and the imagination are one, in the most optimistic vision of the phrase, perhaps it's safe to say we haven't fully comprehended or harnessed the supreme power of the human spirit yet. Spirit in nature. Spirit in nature is experiencing the sublime. It's the ability to call the world blue like an orange or to cuddle a dog like it's your best friend. It's the ability to look at a double rainbow, double rainbow all the way, and cry with joy and put it in a video that brings joy to 43 million people around the world. And if you don't like any of that, let me give you something else from the scientific literature that blew my mind. My first class at USC on health, happiness, and well-being took a study from HeartMath, which was studying the EMF field created by the heart, how the heart has its own nervous system, almost separate from the head, that literally can be in or out of congruence with what's going on within your brain, the brain waves that you're creating. Now, this isn't just relevant for ourselves, it's relevant for everyone around us and the people that we touch. For example, you put one person in a certain state next to a cat, and the cat will entrain to the state of that same person. It's sort of like I forget what they're called, but those I think they're called Newton balls, where like you lift one, you drop it, and it hits the other, and they go like this forever. Or if you put two metronomes side by side out of sync, eventually they will sync up and they will train to each other's patterns. Now, that's all well and good, but what's the practical application? Well, this blew my mind. Literally, at UC San Diego, in medical school, since they had recently changed the national board exams where people had to be in a room with a patient and they didn't want to just pass doctors who knew all the answers but couldn't relate to another human being and build rapport, they basically added a part to the test where they had to pass a real examination, or potential doctors, had to pass a real examination with a patient. Now, in order to train for this, what UC San Diego was doing was they had a program where these medical students would get in a pen with a horse and literally change their heart math, brain, and heart variability patterns in order to entrain to the horse, because a horse lacks the prefrontal cortex, so it responds to people in exactly the way that it feels. So when somebody stepped into the pen with a horse out of an incoherent state where their heart and their brain were not matched up and synchronous, essentially the horse would not come close to them. They were repelled from them like two the same sides of a magnet touching. And what happened? Well, essentially people could train in order to entrain their own heart and brain waves. And literally the horses at that point would follow them. Now, what does this mean? Well, it means that vibes, energy, auras, maybe supernatural, spiritual ideas, but they're phenomena that are completely measurable. And phenomena that by knowing about them, I can not only affect my life, but other people's lives. Now, whenever I've cringed at stuff like this, I had to ask myself, am I skeptical because this is untrue, or because I have a charge with the way some of the people act who generally believe this stuff? Now, as a guide, I only care about what works. Now, why or how exactly it worked and what else could work are important questions, but they're not always the most relevant. So there's a healer that I see and who's changed my life and the life of many people around me in my world. And one of the best stories that I have of him, and it was during the time that I was most skeptical about healing or whatever, was literally a woman came to see him who had edema swelling in her leg and needed to have her leg amputated on a Friday. And she literally came to my house to see him on a Tuesday. And she couldn't even walk to the front door. In 15 seconds, she was up and walking to the front door, sitting on the couch. 15 minutes, she was up and dancing and moving her body full of joy. And she canceled her surgery that Friday. And I thought to myself, okay, cool. We'll give her a month. If she needs to have her freaking leg cut off, then it's going to happen. You know, we'll give it another month. We'll see what happens. 6 months go by. She's totally fine. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, fine. We'll give her a year and we'll see what happens. A year goes by, she's totally fine. It's been over 3 years now, and she still has her leg that she was supposed to have had amputated that Friday. And what did he do? He didn't touch her. He literally just snapped his fingers and went like this. Now, why did that work? Who cares? She has her freaking leg. I mean, things like that are amazing, and you know, I'll do my best to try to explain things and understand things and why apples fall from trees, but dropping apples and explaining gravitational forces are two very different objectives and two very different things. It's easy to make an apple fall. It's difficult to correctly explain why it's falling. And if we have to explain correctly why an apple falls every time we want to drop something to the ground, we're going to have a lot of issues. So, unfortunately, and this has been true for me many times in my life, when destiny points its fingers, some people just sit there and suck on the tip of it. Now, I've seen amazingly unfathomable things, and I've stopped worrying so much, at least in my own life, about what to believe in, because let's face it, beliefs change anyways. The earth was flat and now it's round. It was the center of the universe and now it's the sun. I've learned the hard way that being too smart is too stupid anyway. So I'll give you a quick little funny story about this. There was a great professor on a boat that was giving amazing lectures, and an old sailor who would watch these lectures every night. And one day the old sailor finally went up to him and said, "Oh, Professor, I loved your lecture today. It was so amazing. It was beautiful." And the professor says, "Well, have you ever studied geology?" And the old sailor says, "Oh, well, no, I've never studied geology." And the professor says, "Well, then you've wasted 1/4 of your life." The next day, the sailor comes back and listens to this great lecture by the professor and eagerly approaches him afterwards and says, Professor, that was an amazing lecture today." And the professor says to him, "Well, great, old sailor, have you ever studied oceanography?" And the sailor says, "Well, no, I've never studied oceanography. I'm a simple man, no education." And the professor turns to him, tisk tisk, and says, Half your life has been wasted. And the old man goes home feeling so bad, or back to his bunk at least. The next day, the sailor goes back and listens to that great lecture again. And the lecturer says, afterwards, when they're speaking, have you ever studied meteorology? And the sailor says, oh, no, what is that? What's meteorology? And the professor says, well, that's the study of the wind and weather. And the sailor goes, oh, no, I don't know anything about that. And the professor says, well, then 3/4 of your life have been wasted. And the sailor feels so sad. The next day, the old sailor comes back to the professor, this time with a huge grin on his face. Professor, have you ever studied swimology? And the professor thinks for a moment, swimology? No, I don't think I've ever studied swimology. What is that? And the sailor says, well, it's the practice of swimming. And the professor goes, oh, no, I've read a lot about swimming and oceanography and meteorology and geology, but I don't know how to swim. Forget that. And the sailor says to him, well, I'm afraid, sir, then all your life has been wasted because this ship is sinking and there are no life rafts. We'll all have to swim to shore. So I hope you enjoyed that little one, and we're going to move on to social contribution, our final pillar. Mother Teresa wrote the following poem on her wall in Calcutta. People are illogical, unreasonable, and self-centered. Love them anyways. If you do good, people will accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. Do good anyway. If you're successful, you win false friends and true enemies. Succeed anyway. The good you do today will be forgotten tomorrow. Do good anyway. Honesty and frankness make you vulnerable. Be honest and frank anyway. The biggest men and the biggest women with the biggest ideas can be shot down by the smallest men and the smallest women with the smallest minds. Think big anyway. People favor underdogs, but follow only top dogs. Fight for a few underdogs anyway. What you spend years building may be destroyed overnight. Build anyway. People really need help, but may attack you if you do help them. Help people anyway. Give the world the best you have, and you'll get kicked in the teeth. Give the world the best you have anyway. Because, after all, it's only between you and God anyway. There's nothing more rewarding than selfless service, than making life better for other people. Now, some cringe at service. They think it's just a distraction. But the poet Tagore said it best when he sang, I dreamt that life was joy. I awoke that found that life was service. I acted, and behold, service was joy. Have you ever mentored someone or solved anyone's problem before? Friend on a phone call, dealing with a relationship, whatever it was. How good did that feel? You may even have thought, I was made for this, because you were. When we get caught up in our own selfish desires and pursuits, the wounds of our past, our bad habits, it's arrows in, arrows out. And the only way to break the cycle is to break the cycle. So there's a great quote I love, I and all the public know what every school child learns. Those who do evil, those to whom evil are done, do evil in return. It's a vicious cycle. There's a study I love where researchers instructed priests to give a lecture about the Good Samaritan. Now, what's the Good Samaritan? They had to really think about it. It's the person who goes out of their way to be a blessing to others. Be a Good Samaritan. Pick up the trash. Help an old lady across the road. Now, they set this up so on the way to the lectures, researchers would place a man in the hallway begging for help. Now, the setup of the experiment was the priest had to go give this lecture, and on the way to the lecture, he sees a man begging for help on the way. Now, how many of the priests about to give a lecture about the Good Samaritan actually stopped to help that man begging for help? All of them? 90%? 50%? 10%? How about 0%? Now, again, if I'm only for myself, then who am I? And if I'm only for myself, then who will be for me? You see, we want a family, friends, happiness to be good and to make a positive impact. But we think we have to complete a laundry list of things first. And there just simply isn't enough time to do both. Have you ever experienced that? Feeling like Luke Skywalker in the trash compactor of the Death Star being squeezed by time and knowing you have to trade your values for benefits? Like, do I want to achieve or do I want to give? Do I want to be in my business or with my family? But see, life doesn't work like that. You can't plant a bitter neem seed and expect to grow a sweet mango tree. And yet I see so many people of my generation working themselves to death, pursuing something they don't really want. Money, fame, power. We want to be billionaires and we want to change the world, to help the environment and to enjoy the fruits of modern industry. So we sacrifice now for later. We're like the Good Samaritan, but we're saving up our good deeds for retirement because we're grinding in the day-to-day to get there. But then 30 years go by and you're sick and exhausted and alone, and guess what? You're starting from square one. You just lost 30 years worth of fulfilling your destiny and becoming who you were made to be because you grew a bitter neem tree instead of a sweet mango. Now, everybody today wants the secret, that little thing that if they only knew, it would change their entire life and open the vault. Well, try this. Here's a secret to living a happy life. Fulfillment does not come from what we get. It comes from what we give. Fulfillment does not come from what we get. It comes from what we give. What we give and who we give it to. Because here's the secret. A mango is good when you're alone, but it's even sweeter when you share it. Most people focus on achievement. Fewer focus on success. Almost none focus on legacy. Achievement is doing great things by yourself. Success is achieving great things with a team. But legacy is inspiring others to succeed and achieve great things for the world. Are you making a positive contribution? Are you waiting for the world to give you mangoes before you plant a mango tree? See, it doesn't work like that. One of my teachers tells a story about a friend who said that he'll send a Christmas card to anyone who sends him a Christmas card first. And Dan said, "You must not get a lot of Christmas cards." If you're waiting for other people to give you something first, then you're never going to get what you want. You have to give, and we have to give to get what we want. Give first. And the rewards come back tenfold. Life is not about me, it's about we. So we covered a lot of material right then around these 8 pillars. And as you were listening, did you notice what pillars you're strong in? Did you notice what pillars you've attained a great deal of mastery in? You can almost think about it on a scale from 0, well, really 1 to 10. 1 being you got a lot of room to grow, and 10 being like, oh my goodness, you could teach a master class on this subject. And what pillars were you weak in? What pillars did it seem like you could actually do a bit more work on in order to kind of raise up your whole system? Because if one of these pillars is off, the whole system is weakened. Integral fitness isn't personal development or therapy or self-help for broken people who need to be fixed. Like I said, it's not physical therapy for people who are injured. It's spiritual, mental, and emotional exercise to get fitter in every area of my life. Now, we've spent years figuring this all out, and we want to share it with you so that you can share it with others. Our mission is to raise the world's standard of health to integral fitness, This isn't on a improvement list. It's a freaking necessity for the world. That's why it's my goal to make this easy for you. All the hard work that's been put into figuring this stuff out, exploring every continent and tribe on the human map in the mind, can now be systematized, updated, and expanded for the 21st century with cutting-edge research, material, etc. You don't have to spend 40 years in the desert or in a mountain or in a cave to get it. We can get you from where you are to where you want to be fast, flexibly, authentically, strategically, and timely. This coaching program is not designed to keep you feeding at the teat of some marginally trained person for the rest of your life, like so many other programs are. No, our goal is not to give you fish, it's to teach you how to fish. Our goal is to get you to the point of becoming a transformation leader as fast as possible, to power level you through. We don't want you in our coaching program forever, because guess what? That means it's not working. The point is to set you up on your own so that you're empowered to take your own initiative, to have your own breakthroughs, and more importantly, to transform so that you can transform others. Remember, it's about not just what we get, but what we give. We want to improve the world with integral fitness, to raise people's standards of health so they don't need to suffer anymore, and so that they can achieve magnificent things and raise the material conditions of all. As far as I'm concerned with this, we have the best technology on the planet for achieving that ends, and we want to get it out of our heads and into your hands so that you can get integrally fit and maximize your potential for life. So why do you need a coach for this? A lot of people, even in my own life, I've thought I can do this myself, but it's usually not true. No one can do it themselves, and no one does it themselves. Every NASCAR driver has a team, a golfer has a caddy, Olympic athletes have an entire corner of coaches and doctors and entourage and trainers. How many employees does the CEO have? No one does it alone. John Wooden said that the most important ingredient of stardom is the rest of the team. And the famous golfer Ben Hogan once was asked, "Can you golf without a coach?" and replied, "Can you brush your hair without a mirror?" If something is important to you, as important as your life, why leave it up to chance? Why risk failure when you can have magnificent success? Whatever you can do or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has a power, genius, and magic in it. Begin it now. And see, a belief is a poor substitute for an experience. How many times have you told yourself, I don't want to do that? You moaned and groaned and kicked the stairs, and then finally you went to that party or dinner or conference or vacation or embarked upon this crazy experience, and you had the time of your life. You believe one thing and the experience was something very different. Of course, that was just an exception, right? Otherwise there wouldn't be a rule. Well, see, I'm amazed by how many people I hear say, I've tried everything and nothing works, when what they mean is, I've tried all the things that I think will work, or I take for granted will work, or that feel safe and comfortable for me right now, and none of those things work. But of course they're not going to work. Exercise and weight training doesn't work because it's comfortable. It works because you are ripping through flesh, cell membranes, and existing muscle fibers. Who in their right mind would try that for the first time, knowing what it was, or do it consistently? It is not comfortable at all. Now, if you tried every combination on a lock, would it open? Yes or no? Every combination on a lock. Well, remember that vault we spoke about at the beginning? If it's not open yet, then you haven't tried everything. If today is tomorrow you worried about yesterday, I urge you to take action now. I know some of you are scared because you're not sure it's going to work. And I can't guarantee you're going to get what you're looking for with us, but I can guarantee this is the best opportunity to start. As Socrates said, most beg for masters while few seek self-mastery. Let's not make the same mistake of surrendering to masters in matters that matter most. May we all become masters of our fates and captains of our souls. Thank you so much for listening to all of this. I hope you learned something, you got something, or at least you feel refreshed and repowered. Much love, many blessings, and have a great night. Or good morning!